Aloha. Welcome to the Maui Community Investigation, a grassroots group that has been really digging into what really truly happened at the Lahaina fire. And I'm here with my teammate, Bruce Douglas, and we are joined with Tim Stokesbury. Tim, welcome. It's nice having you here with us. Tim has participated in other interviews that we have done starting about 5 months ago. So again, with Tim's expertise, I think it's really important to put things in perspective. And we're going to take time to look at the cars in the burn zone and just do a quick analysis and overview of the many vehicles that were incinerated in strange ways. So again, Tim, welcome. And Tim, could you just start by just giving a brief overview? I know it's been 30 years of experience dealing with fires. So just a brief perspective, being a former retired fire captain from Kauai.
Yeah, you nailed it. I retired Kauai Fire Department, fire captain. Lightning strikes that we saw in the other thing, not as much. Car fires, very regular. Been to a lot of car fires. They happen quite frequently for a number of reasons. And so I've had a lot of experience putting out cars or trying to put out cars. They can be difficult.
Well, what was your professional training, Kim?
My professional training, I worked at PMRF. So I started out there as crash fire. So you learn about fuels, a lot of hydrocarbon fires, a lot more fuels, hypergolics and whatnot, because you're dealing with aircraft and the different, more machinery than houses. Your firefighting is based on ships and airplanes more than it is wildland, bushes, and houses. So I was trained for that. My firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 in crash fire ARF, they call it. Firefighting. So, and I've done shipboard firefighting, gone through the training for that as well, a number of different times. So that's where you're dealing with more of metals and machinery and usually the fuels and the different combustible elements that are involved.
Well, great. Well, Tim, we're going to just go through a bunch of slides. And again, we'd love you to comment as to what happened. Now we're going to start. This is where the fire began, the second fire in Lahaina that really created the destruction that occurred. We started really right near the highway, and you can see this fire, and as we go around the exit, it really was about this much fuel that was there. Now, we're going to show that the fire, it was that light brush that was traveling very fast, and basically, it went around. Again, you saw it go around. This is where the cars were, that second shot. And right here, I want to pay attention to, because again, all of this was light grass and light brush, not a lot of fuel load. This here is a whole asphalt parking lot. That is this whole area. And so, but again, the question that I have is, how can a vehicle that was parked in that spot that I just showed with just light grass around it be destroyed like this, especially when you look at the Quonset hut, you look at the house, but look at this light brush right here, untouched, not burnt. And as you go further down and look at the vehicle, you can see again that house has been barely touched at all. But again, look at the destruction here, but the rear cab, I mean, there were actually aerosol cans in here that were perfectly fine when we went there. This was 2 weeks after the fire that we took these shots. And you can see the very back of it where the actual fuel tank was not ignited. So again, it raises questions. You can see the Quonset hut there that I showed you in that video. So this is the first vehicle that will start right at the beginning of where the fire started. So, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so real quick, I'm noticing that the front tires are completely gone. The back tire one's flat, and the other one looks like it's completely untouched. You got charring on all around the tire, on the side of the vehicle. So you're thinking like, well, why did all that metal get scalded? And you don't see the tires looks fine. The rim even looks fine. That's kind of weird, because the rubber is, anybody knows that the rubber, once it gets burning on a car, it can be tough to put out. Rubber tires are a little bit tough and tricky to put out sometimes once they get going, and they create a lot of black smoke. Really unusual. As far as the house goes and that light brush, that to me, that should have just been all completely gone. Although we don't know I don't see the wind direction. I don't know which way the wind was coming. So if the wind was coming from the light brush towards the vehicle, it might have overpowered the radiant heat going towards that light brush. So there's always a plausible chance that something weird happened. But you got a tree sitting right there too that looks untouched, and it looks like it's this side of the fence from what I can see. And that's very interesting in itself. The vehicle itself, the main things that are going to burn in there is going to be the rubber. If there's any exotic metals, which that truck doesn't look like to be one that would have magnesium in it, but magnesium is almost impossible to put out once it goes and gets on fire. So some of the engine blocks, if they have magnesium, which you don't see much anymore, or people put aftermarket parts on their cars with magnesium, they'll burn like white phosphorus, and you can't put it out. I mean, literally throw it in a pool and it'll keep burning. Really hard to put out certain exotic metals, but I don't see that being a type of vehicle that should have that. As far as the engine block goes, like you said, your main fuel load is going to be in your gas tank. The engine doesn't really hold a lot of fuel in itself. And so it's interesting that the back of the truck where the gas tank would be, between the front cab and the back tires, somewhere in that area, it's less burned than the engine block where there's less fuel. So that's kind of a oxymoron. Let's see. That right there, when you look at that dash, you see the glass looks like it's actually been melted. It looks like a grilled cheese sandwich inside the cab. When you see the inside of the cab photo, you can see the glass looks like it's actually been melted and slumped down over the dash, and maybe some stuff in there. And that takes a real hot fire to melt glass. And again, you can find out what temperatures need to be to happen to vitrify glass like that and melt it. So I think that would be something I'd look into. It's all about temperatures, fuel load and temperatures, BTUs and temperatures.
Yep.
You're seeing things that normally wouldn't burn just completely, like you say, it's like white ash, almost like powder.
And you can see the glass here also.
Yeah.
That has been, dripped in some areas. But again, seeing that this is tempered glass, would that still burn a lot lower temperature, or are we talking about the 2,700 degrees?
No, the tempering is actually like when you're Corningware versus a glass that you drink out of, it can handle the higher heats. But that's also, I believe, I don't want to lie, but I believe that would be a tempered and laminated glass. So it's actually two pieces of glass with glue in between it. And that's when it breaks, that way it kind of sticks together. If you've ever tried to cut out a glass windshield on a car to extricate an injured person at an accident, it doesn't just break and fall out like glass in your house. So tempered glass is really resilient. You can literally take a hammer and hit it, and generally it won't break. It's the edges of the tempered glass. I was a journeyman glazer for years, so I dealt with glass a lot. And I'd take door size sliding glass door panels and throw them in the dumpster, and they wouldn't even break. Like literally chuck them in. And so tempered glass is extremely strong, and it handles the heat better than annealed glass or regular glass.
Okay, so as we go along, you could again see the amount of brush right here that in the house that's fairly untouched, but yet this is in the middle of a large driveway and nothing else burnt around it.
Right.
So again, yeah.
So that's completely suspect. I mean, unless that car was the source of its own fire for some reason, like an electrical short or something that went on, arson or whatever, then that would completely defy all logic, right? Because something had to start that car on fire, right? So what's the ignition source for that car fire? And that's where your guys in prevention are really good at finding out. If you can talk to a fireman that's been trained to a higher level of prevention, because they go into forensics and they can tell you where that fire started, most likely where the initial impact of fire was on that vehicle. And that's going to give you some clues as well. I mean, I know the basics.
So again, you can see some strange burn patterns. Notice how the back of this vehicle has been scorched, and then it just like a line, it just carries along the front engine with the back again intact, and
Right.
then it goes along here. So, and you can see trees standing around here too, and telephone poles, and so again,
Yeah.
what would you
So
when you look at this, what do you see in terms
what
of?
one thing I see that's a suspect there is, I would state openly that rubber ignites easier than metal or steel. And it looks like that steel burned and the rubber tire doesn't look affected. I mean, it's still holding air. So why did something with a lower ignition temperature and something easier to catch on fire burn where this did not burn, and the steel 6 inches away looks quite charred and affected? So those are the kind of things I would look at, and it's just an irregularity. I'm not standing right there with a tape measure and really seeing it up close, but it looks like there's a perfectly good tire still holding air, and there's a back of a car that's been melted. So that's
Yep.
what caused that. What impingement caused that?
In
There's
our
another one
looking
we're
at
talking
this,
about.
in our looking at this, we're always looking at all possibilities for a fire. Was this just a brush fire, starting an urban fire, or was some sort of technology used? And plasma wave technology is one thing we're looking at, which directed energy weapons is a subcategory of it. And it behaves a lot like lightning, because plasma energy, lightning is like plasma. And so when lightning comes down, it's going to be attracted towards something that's got mass to it,
Yeah.
something that's that's got density. So it'll be attracted to a car before it's attracted to something next to it, a playhouse or something that doesn't have energy to it. And it's going to be attracted toward the most dense part of the car, which would be the engine block. So in these cars, we see the engine block like that first one we saw, where the engine block was melted, disintegrated, but the rest of the car was not. Starts to look like a lightning type plasma energy type of burn to us, because as you said, the engine block, the engine compartment doesn't hold a whole lot of burnables, a little bit of gas in the carburetor, but a few rubber hoses, but unless the gas tank explodes and starts to roll underneath the car and catches the engine on fire, I mean, I could see at that point enough heat. But to have the first truck picture where the cab was fine, but the engine block was, the back of the truck was fine, but the engine cab and the block were melted. Have you seen anything like this? Does this look anything like what you normally see?
I've never seen anything like that, because usually the engine block is going to be a heavy steel because it's an internal combustion engine. So it's meant to run at a certain temperature, and it's actually got fire in it, right? It's what it does. It ignites the fuel and drives the piston, the cam. We all know how an engine works, right? So that would be your most densest material in the car, I would think, would be the engine block. That's the most heavy steel, and it's probably not as much, valve covers and stuff like that, they can be alloys and whatnot, and aluminum and whatnot, but the engine block itself is usually hard steel, big, heavy steel. And then the side of the metal that they use to clad the car in, the body, the frame would be another heavy metal point. And then the lighter metals would be the cladding on the car because of weight and the way that they build them now with presses and shape that metal to fit the car. So it's really unusual that you would see such a dense, heavy piece of metal burn, and then the skin of the cars, fine for the most part. I mean, there's no holes through it. If you've ever tried to torch and patch a door with a brazing rod, you'll see it's very tricky, because if the heat gets a little too hot, you'll just burn the metal out, and you'll get a bigger hole than you started with. So that's really unusual, that your engine block, the heaviest piece of metal in the car, is completely gone, and the rest of the car that's lighter, milder steel is still standing and fairly unaffected. So that would be another thing I'd look at. Like, generally the engine block would be the last thing that would burn in a car, not the first. Just my opinion.
So again, we saw a lot of these vehicles that were burnt out like this throughout the whole area. And again, we saw this glass also that was just kind of melted over different metal parts within the vehicle itself. So like this here. And then we actually can look at a video that was taken early on. This was at about 2 o'clock in the morning, that was taken in Lahaina. And look at this vehicle. Let me just stop it here. Look at this vehicle that is in the background here, fully torched, but yet notice there's not a lot of burn material around here also.
Right.
And so again, that raises a level of suspicion as we move forward with this. And
Right.
Have you
And you
seen
see the
anything
wind-
like that where a car all by itself will catch on fire? I mean, what would ignite?
Cars
How do
can't
cars
do
ignite?
that. I mean, I've been to car fires where the people are driving down the road or even parked in a parking lot. They go to go shopping and they come out and their car's on fire. Like it literally happens. Electrical shorts, some different things can happen inside. I've been to, I don't want to say brands of cars, but there's a certain brand that I've been to a lot of that just no one's in it, sitting there in a parking lot and it catches on fire. But for this to happen all over the place, all at one time, that happens like maybe you go to one of those once every 4 or 5 years where it just catches on fire, sitting there with no one driving it. It's not doing anything. There wasn't a campfire next to it. It's just sitting in a parking lot and catches on fire. It does happen, but it's really rare. It's really rare.
Ignition, I
So-
can see the upholstery inside of the car having, catching on fire. I can see the cab inside with the upholstery being a good fuel.
Yeah.
Of course, the tires are a fuel.
Yep.
I don't see a lot of fuel in an engine area, except maybe a few rubber hoses and a little bit of gas. And of course, the big fuel is when the gas tank ruptures. And that's usually when I've seen a fire and the gas tank explodes.
Well,
Like the local boys who catch cars on fire alongside the road, they'll throw a rag in the gas tank and ignite the gas, and then the whole car burns. I could see that.
Correct. And the one thing about the engine block, though, you've got the pan in the bottom that holds oil, which is a hydrocarbon. And so there is a significant amount of something that could catch on fire, but it's got to get through the pan. It's got to get into the engine. It's not outside spark's not going to hit that and necessarily catch it on fire. Now, maybe some car that's gaskets are shot and it's got oil all over the engine block and that ignites and goes, it's hard to say, but you're seeing kind of a common thread here. And if you look at the wind, it's blowing from right to left through this little corridor. So that would be the way that it's the wind, the wind is pushing that heat towards these objects. And so that's how a fire works. It catches something on fire, and that fire is like an animal. It's looking for more food and it needs to find fuel to sustain burning. So that heat preheats up, like I said, the actual solid fuels don't burn. They've got to be heated to enough to where they're vaporizing or giving off enough vapor, and that vapor is what burns. So when the heat precedes the fire downwind, that's preheating those elements to get them closer, and the more vapor they start putting off. So when the fire gets there, they ignite a lot more readily than they would if there was no wind driving that fire. But there's a common thread we're seeing with a lot of these things where we're seeing the engine blocks are getting the most damage of the car. And in my experience, the engine blocks usually the thing gets the least damage of the car. It's usually, like you say, the rubber, the upholstery, the plastic on the inside of the car. Those are all the things that burn first. The tires, that's another one. By the time it gets to the engine block, unless that's what started it, that's really rare. So a lot of these look like they're being started at the engine block. Well, why is that? That's really not normally how a car catches on fire, in my experience.
Do you have any experience of lightning striking a car?
No, but I've had experience where cars have hit power lines, and the power lines have come down on the car and they're energized. And so those are tricky, right? If there's someone that's hurt critically and they're going to die without intervention, we need to figure out how to de-energize those lines so we can get in and help the patient. And those become really, you don't get a second chance. You're playing with some serious stuff. And for the most cases, they tell the people to stay in the car if they can so they don't ground out, and then tell the KIUC, or, that's our power guys, come over and drop the power. We have some other techniques we can use to try to pull lines out of the way. And we got to be really careful about implementing those because they're, you're talking about life and death many times. But that's the closest I've come to any sort of energized electric car, other than the electric vehicles now that we have. They've got the electricity inside them, so that's a whole nother animal. But these look like they're normal internal combustion engines. They don't look electric. So
in this last slide I have here, Tim, west, it's the bypass. So it's way up high. There was all this was dirt prior to the fire. One additional question, Tim, is that there were vehicles that were just in the middle of nowhere, like this vehicle that was up on the bypass that a picture Eric West took, where there was no brush, just dirt prior to the fire itself and along down the slope. So again, the question is, how can something combust like this out of nowhere, just being parked up on the ridge like that?
Okay, you probably don't want to hear this, but this can happen. And like I said, in my career, I've been to a few that just sitting there and not doing anything. People are not in the car, no one's around it, and it just catches on fire. It does happen. It can happen. But you're talking like, say I've done my job for 25, 30 years. And in my career, I've seen that happen maybe 2 or 3 times. So when you have 15 cars that are doing this, or 5 cars even, to that happen all at the same time, it's not, the probability of that is astronomical, I would think. I'm not a statistician, but I mean, it's very rare that happens, unless an outside person came and did that. It had some outside influence. For a static car to sit there and all of a sudden catch on fire, it does happen, but it's very, very rare. And you've got instances upon instances all throughout this thing of this happening, where there's very little fuel load that would warrant a car catching on fire. And it looks like that's the ocean on the background, right? So the
That's
wind
right.
coming from the back driver's side corner of that vehicle and blowing towards the front of it, which is a way more, it's clearer on the back of the car. It's more dirt. The only grass I see is kind of in front of the car. It looks like there might have been some stuff out there, but the fire that would have started this fire, if it was wind driven, would have come from the right side or the left side, driver's side, rear panel of that car. And it looks like pure dirt, like there's nothing there that would cause that. So that's really something crazy. I mean, that's something I would definitely look at and go, how did this car catch on fire? Why did this car catch on fire? And that would be like, if I rolled up in the fire department, we got a call, there's a car, it's on fire, I would go, okay, it was either this 1 in a million freak accidents that happens once every 5 or 6 years, or someone lit that car on fire, right? I mean, it doesn't look like anything external as far as brush or trees or radiant heat did that.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we keep on going back to these questions about, as we move forward with this, does this initial vehicle analysis warrant a full forensic investigation, especially when we start to look at the cause of the fire itself? Because right now, those 3 reports that were put out up to May 2024 by the government do not even mention vehicles, other than there were so many vehicles that were destroyed, but they don't go into any analysis like this. So does this show that we need to do some deeper digging into this to look at cause? Or, because as they're putting it right now, this was a typical urban interface fire, single source start, and again, it just leaves questions as to how they're brushing over this whole analysis and investigation that they're doing.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. And I can't say it any better than you just did. I mean, that's right there, makes no sense, right? Critical thinking skills. You don't have to be a fireman. You don't have to be, just a normal person with some basic critical thinking skills. And you look at that and it just doesn't add up, right? So if I saw that fire and I didn't know that this was anything to do with the Maui fire, and I saw that there, I'd go, well, if someone later lit it on fire, like people do, abandoned cars, or it had that 1 in a million kind of weird electrical thing that just happens every once in a while. That's really, really rare, but it does happen. So there's always that one little piece of the thing that could have happened. But when you see it replayed over and over and over again in these photos, it just adds up to, like, it's almost improbable that could even happen, right? It seems astronomical to me that the chances of that happening to that many cars with, no outside ignition source, it just doesn't add up. And of course, those things are the things that it would be great if you could have some guy that could do a forensic analysis of these clues or this evidence. I think they would find something. It's
well,
not.
And I think, Tim, what you're sharing is that, we suspect also that we need to do a deeper dive, get more and more forensic experts, because we're going against the federal government, the state government, who has put in over $2 million into their investigations, coming up with a particular story that I think we need to rebuttal. And we have to look at some of the many omissions that they have. And as we looked at their reports, there were 20 of these omissions and rebuttals that we need to really move on to. Bruce, do you want to have say anything else or any other questions of Tim?
Yeah, I'm always looking at what technologies could have been used to have started these fires and perpetuated it. And, when I look at that very first picture of the truck that was right at the beginning of the fire, and that was one of our most suspect vehicles of all, where the truck engine block was melted, but the rear of it was not. And if I had to look at what technology could have started that, only something that would resemble lightning, where the lightning would be attracted, the plasma energy would be attracted toward the part with greater mass, would start looking at that. And we don't just see these patterns here in Maui, but, in these crazy fires happening worldwide, people are seeing the same phenomena in the strange fires.
I agree. And I think you're on the right track, and I would keep pursuing that. And if there's some sort of, chemical analysis or something like that you could do with some of these materials that you've collected, and you're finding the different ignition or burning ignition points is important. Like how much heat does it take for something to catch on fire? And then also the sustainability of that, its own being its own fuel. Like, could that object that's on fire produce enough BTUs to cause the aftermath that's showing, how it spreads through lots of things. So, you got to see what could cause the fire to ignite, what could create that, and then is that fuel load enough to create the aftermath, or how that, when you look at the ashes, to burn it that bad, or to do these things, these different materials, find out at what temperature glass melts, find out what temperature, all these things, and you start putting it together like a puzzle. I think it's going to lead you down a path that's going to be a little more probable with your line of thinking, because it doesn't seem like a normal, natural thing that we see all the time in our day-to-day business. Everything's a little skewed. Everything's got that one little piece that it could have happened, but it's not probable.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim, for your analysis and for your input and all your expertise that you bring to this also. Yeah. I greatly appreciate it as we move forward. So thank you, Tim.
Well, I appreciate you guys.
Mahalo for watching.
Thank you, Tim.
You guys be safe.